Over the next few minutes, I'll be playing some video footage that I captured over the past couple of weeks of some sunsets and time-lapse as we set the stage for today's presentation. The topic will be sunlight, reality, and fiction. My name is Steve Matthews, and I'll be your host over the next few minutes. I also go by the name Teeth of the Lamb, and I have a channel on YouTube. Back in August of 2017, during the total solar eclipse, I thought, well, I'd take the grandchildren out in the front yard and we'd watch it all together. I was expecting to see a 2,000-mile wide shadow pass over the United States. But when that didn't happen, and I realized it was only 70 miles wide, I wanted answers. And so I thought, well, I'll check and see what the scientific community says. And it was these two images that changed my mind and made me realize we're being lied to. These images are frothed with problems. They remind me of a schoolboy who's taking a true and false test. And he rations in his own mind, well, if I don't answer, it'll be counted against me. But if I just guess and just mark one or the other, true or false, I have a chance of getting 50% of them right, or maybe all of them right. But he doesn't stop to realize he could get them all wrong by just randomly choosing. And that's exactly what's happened here. Everything about these images is wrong. These images are a product of a movement that Samuel Rowbotham started in the late 1800s, and he questioned, is the earth a globe or is it flat? And this set the scientific community into a frenzy as they were ate alive by public debates, which were the form of entertainment in the day. And it wasn't until 1969 when they literally had to form a organization to combat these questions and provide answers that matched their heliocentric ball Earth model. And eclipses were one thing that they absolutely couldn't answer. Shadows coming in from the wrong direction and nothing matched. And especially on solar eclipses. Total solar eclipses which cast a 70-mile wide shadow from an object that they had now told everybody is 2,159 miles wide. And that presented a problem. So they go into this diagram, they create this diagram, and they have converging and diverging light rays, and it is a mess, scientifically and all other ways. And it doesn't match reality. We can see reality, and we can test it, and we can repeat it. The misguided direction that these two images have led people into believing that we have diverging and converging light rays coming from the sun, or maybe you can call them corpuscular rays, were presenting a problem in another video that I was working on the sunset and what we see as the light vanishes. So I had to cut this out and make a separate video. We'll cover several of the most egregious errors that these images portray. Before we do that, I want to share just a couple more things with you. And one is a level test that I did out over the Pacific Ocean. It's a 180-degree swath of the horizon. I set it up with my cell phone mounted on the tripod, and it starts at azimuth northeast 26 around to southwest 217, You can see that there on the compass on the right, that's the span of the horizon. So next time somebody tells you that they have seen the curve at the beach, show them this, because it's perfectly level. And the only deviation it has is the limitation of my bubble balance, which it's showing a slight deviation because I couldn't get it centered exactly. It's not the most accurate for a span like this. But I did a okay job. You can see that it's virtually level. I thought I'd share that with you in case any of you want to use it for something. But this is a full 180-degree span out over the largest body of water on Earth, the Pacific Ocean. And that's fairly telling. When I was setting up for the sunsets, I had my aperture lock on, and you see what happens. You can see the reduction of the sun as it moves off into the distance. I thought that was interesting. With the aperture lock off, you don't see that because it's so bright. But this definitely shows the reduction as it moves off into the distance. I thought you might like to see that, but this is my own footage. And then a hour-and-a-half time lapse, 2 50-minute segments of from sunset to the passing of the light. And that's actual footage, and that's an hour-and-a-half of footage right there, cut down into 20 seconds, 10 seconds each. But it's a good way to see it, and you can see the arch at the top of that as the light passes off into the distance, and I'll be talking about that in my next video even more. So here we are 7.5 minutes into this video, and we get into our topic of these two images and their glaring flaws. And I have a video that I sped up on how to draw perspective shadows. We need to see that. It's 1.5 minutes. So let's go on that. So we start out with our spot point light source at the top there, and that's a single light source. And then we draw a line straight down to the horizon or the vanishing point, and this becomes the shadow vanishing point. We mark our uppermost points on our object, draw our lines from that light source over those, and then we go to the bottom points on our object and go to the shadow vanishing point. And where these lines intersect is where we draw a line and connect them, and that becomes the shape of our shadow for the object. This is real quick, but it's important for what we're going to talk about. Have you ever thought about those images of the eclipses and how they've drawn them, what that would do to the shadows on the Earth? Well, this is going to lay it out for you. And it's real problematic. So this is about the end of this. You can see how that's done. And if you need more, there's lots of videos online about it. We actually cover this at timestamp about 33 or 34 minutes into this video, right at the end of it. So I actually draw out, using this method, what kind of shadows we'd get if those diagrams are true, which they're not. But we would have multi-cast shadows from that large sun and all those different corpuscular rays coming in at different angles. So one of the first things they teach us is that our sun is way a million times bigger than the Earth. And you can see a line down there pointing, an arrow pointing to the Earth and its size and the different planets. And these are all their speculations, of course. And then the sun's size. And this is going to be a problem because we don't have a sun that size, and it's obvious. Now think about this carefully. If this image and what they're portraying here were true, you would have a reduced or an enlarged terminator line on that moon, because as you diagonally come in, it would change the position of the halfway point on that moon, and you would either have a larger or a smaller area of shadow, and you can't have that. It has to be straight for it to be a half moon, and I'll explain that a little bit more a little later. Now they have to make the sun great big, and that's important to get these shadows. The way they're portraying it is that if the sun were made up of cells, every cell on the surface of that sun is a spot point light, and it would have crepuscular rays shining in all directions. So you can pick any position you want and get any kind of shadow you want, and you can have it cross and converge and all that stuff, but only when it's close to the object. The light source has to be much bigger than the object itself that's casting the shadow. That's the only way you can get a penumbra. The umbra is the darker shadow area, and their penumbras are the light that shines around the object casting the shadow. So that's why they draw it great big, because it's the only way they can explain this. But you're going to see this does not work out. It looks good on paper, but only for a moment. In essence, what they're trying to show you here is that every position on the face of that sun, which is much larger than the sun that we have in reality, that every position on it is a spot point light, and you can have light going in all directions from every position on that sun. Not only would the terminator line be either greater or shorter than the halfway point on the moon, it would also do the same thing to the Earth. So that would mess up our times, or the length of the day on the Earth, and it would also mess up the phases of the moon, and you wouldn't be able to get a perfectly half moon. Multi-point light sources on the sun would cause multi-directional shadows on the Earth, and that doesn't match observable reality. We have one single spot point light, and that's it. But in all fairness, to be accurate, our sun does have multiple spot points. One in the center is the one that we normally use, because our sun is so small in diameter in the sky that it's somewhat insignificant and just becomes nuisance to use multiple spot points. In reality, we actually have one on each side, and we use the center one because it's not going to change anything much. But what I do believe that causes is you get a little larger shadow, and I think that this causes the shadow to increase as you move up away from the surface, and to decrease as you move back toward the surface. And that's all that does. But it's insignificant, and our sun is not filling the whole sky. So what they're showing us is each of these light rays has a multi-point light source, and it shines in all directions on the sun. or out of the sun. And you have to have the sun big to get these kind of angles on the object, like the moon or the Earth. And it has to be very close, the light source does. Otherwise, if it diverges from anything that diverges at all, would shoot off into space and it would miss the Earth. The only thing that hits the Earth is straight light rays, and that's because of that 93 million miles. They're fake 93 million miles, of course, but if this drawing were true, we would have multi-directional shadows on objects on the Earth, and we don't. Eratosthenes' stick would have been real hard to tell where the sun was coming from, because it would have had a very broad shadow on one little stick. What they're saying is each of these arrows is pointing to a multi-directional light, and they're only picking one direction, the direction that they need to cause their shadows. But it would be multi-directional in all these positions, and it would emanate out and cause multiple shadows everywhere, and it would cause havoc on the Earth. Only a large, close, multi-point light source can cause any of these angles on the moon or the Earth. And it's not possible when you stretch it out very far at all, even as far away as they say the moon is at 239,000 miles away. It would be too far, and light that would hit the Earth would be straight light. And I'm going to demonstrate that. But I just want you to know the only way this can happen, these angles, is with being very close to a large light source with multi-point light all over it. So how do we know what they're telling us isn't true, and distance doesn't make a difference, and a huge sun has angled light coming in like they're saying? Well, it's because of this drawing here. We have a half moon with a nice clean terminator line right down the center, and the only way that's possible is if light comes in. Remember I told you earlier, light has to come in straight to give you a half moon shadow. And they do draw that right when they show their phases of the moon, because they don't want that wrong. They're very deceptive, and they're experts at it. And they switch along with the wind, whatever they need. They just change it. And people swallow it up. And they don't cross-reference these things. I'm going to blow this up here. See those angles on that shining on that little moon? Well, let's see what that does. Well, at those angles of light shining on the moon, you would get something like this. And you would have a small shadow, because light would actually be able to reach past the halfway point and reach around to the other side, because of a large light source shining it at an angle would light around the back side of that ball. So when you have a new moon and it's real close to the sun, you would see a light ring with a dark center, and you don't see that. And you would also, during an eclipse, if the moon is indeed causing the eclipse, you would also see the same thing. You would see light wrapped around a dark circle. Like I said earlier in this video, any angled light hitting an object like the moon or the Earth would either increase or decrease the position of that terminator line. And in this particular case, it would be wrapping around the back side, decreasing the terminator line. And the light source has to be way bigger for you to get these angles. And it has to have multi-point light sources on it. And we just don't see that in reality. We have a nice straight terminator line on the moon when it's a half moon. We don't have multi-directional shadows on the Earth. We have one shadow per object. And no, reality kind of shows us that what they're drawing is not feasible, and it's the distance that makes all the difference, and the size. So now we're going to all take a little trip to Barrow, Alaska. It's within the Arctic Circle, and it's one of the farthest northern points where people actually live. The point of this little trip we're taking is to look at the shadows produced in Barrow during the 4th of July and see if they could actually have the sun at a 40-degree angle in the sky in reality. I don't believe it's possible on a ball Earth, but I do think it's possible on a flat Earth, and we'll take a look.
Hey, so we're at the 4th of July parade here in Barrow, Alaska. We're gonna turn it over. We got it coming through. Oh, here they come. Here they come.
So, looking at that flag and the shadows casting on the ground, and you can see the sun, the rays from the sun, where it's coming from. At first, I didn't realize this was a portrait image or video, and I re-engineered using the how to draw perspective shadows. I reverse engineered the lines and came up with a almost exact position for that sun. And then I realized, hey, it actually, you can see the sun rays because I was looking at it in landscape. SunCalc says that the altitude of the sun in Barrow, Alaska is at 41 degrees on the 4th of July, and that was in 2021. I don't think you can see that. Here's my re-engineering of where I believe the sun was positioned without being able to see the upper part of that image. Then I realized, no, it's there, and it did match. So that those lines actually work. At 3 o'clock on July 4th, SunCalc says that the altitude of the sun would be 41.44 degrees, which is probably accurate, and gives us shadow lengths, and those are probably accurate. But I don't think they could actually see the sun that high, and we're going to look at that now. So we're going to look on Google Earth and look up Barrow, Alaska, but I want you to take note here of the equator in the center, that line going around the Earth, and the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. And that's essentially, by placing the sun on those lines, is the same as tilting the Earth. And placing the sun on the Tropic of Cancer is essentially the same as tilting it to its furthest point northward. And the Tropic of Capricorn, if you place the sun over that line, it would be its furthest point southward on a globe. So I don't want anybody to say, well, you didn't account for the tilt of the Earth, because this is exactly what we're doing by placing the sun over that line. So let's type in Barrow, Alaska. It's within the Arctic Circle. We're going to zoom out so you can see where it's at. And then we're going to tilt it. So you can see that they're not going to be able to see around that curve to see the sun. At best, they'd be able to see it on the horizon. The sun would be down there, and their angle of sight isn't going to be that steep. So look at the angle from Barrow down to the Tropic of Cancer. Do you think they could see that at 41 degrees in their sky? Now let's look at it again. We're going to zoom in a second time. And I'll back out. Now look down there at the Tropic of Cancer, how far away that is, how steep they have to look. How are they going to see that at 40 degrees up in their sky? That sun can't reach any higher. Not on this ball Earth. It can on a flat Earth. It's possible for them to see it that high in the sky, but not on this. Look how far down around the curve that sun would be. I'll pause right here. Now, I mentioned that I thought they could see it at a 40-degree angle in Barrow, Alaska, if the sun were on a flat Earth. And you see the blue line in the center there, the circle, that's the Tropic of Cancer. And the sun on that, yes, the people in Barrow, Alaska would be looking up at the sun at an angle. And, this altitude may be off or whatever too, but it's possible on a flat Earth. There's no way to have it placed 40 degrees. There's the Tropic of Cancer. Now we're going to tilt it until we see it. They have to look around all that curve to see the sun at that level. At best, if at all, they would see it on smack dab on the horizon. And that's not where the sun was. We saw that in the little video. And that's where sun and moon calc said it would be 40 degrees in the air, 41 degrees. So you can see Barrow is a red dot in the Arctic Circle, and there's the Tropic of Cancer. Here's looking at it straight on. The Tropic of Cancer is the furthest north the sun reaches. There's Barrow way up there on the top. There's the Tropic of Cancer, and here's where the sun is. Can they see clear around that? And would it be 40 degrees altitude in their sky? Not a chance. Not a chance. Not even on a ball Earth. Which it seems like anything's possible on a ball Earth. Nope. I think that is false. No way you're going to see this at 40 degrees in your sky up in Barrow. The sun is way too far down, and I don't think they could see it at all. Even if we stretch that sun out from the Earth and put some distance between it, we're not out even as far as the moon, but it would straighten that line out and they would be looking out over the horizon. It would never go up any higher. We'll draw this out a little better in a minute. Remember how big they say the sun is and how tiny the Earth is. So now let's look at the distance. Let's put some distance with that sun between the Earth and the sun. So there's Barrow up the top, and there's the sun. Look how steep that is. Now let's drag that line clear out and place the sun not even as far away as the moon. Because the line I've drawn here isn't even as far away as the moon would be. There would be 30 Earths between the Earth and the moon. So we're just going not even as the distance of the moon. See what's happening to that line? See how it's straightening out? That's what distance does. That's why we don't have those diverging and converging light rays coming at the Earth. In 93 million miles, you can't even fathom how far away that is. That little 93 million miles is a huge factor in their model, and they can't ignore it. Well, they do, but they can't in reality because it wouldn't work. The whole thing is, if it were 93 million miles away, and of course I don't believe any of their nonsense, you would not get any diverging or converging light rays hitting this Earth. They would all be straight on. And that's what they used to teach until they had to explain their eclipses, and then it all went out the window, and now they don't mention it. Light comes into the Earth straight. At least it would on a ball Earth. So you see this angle? Now that top line is what happens when you drag it out not even as far away as the moon, according to their numbers. I don't know if I placed this protractor in the right place or anything, but light would be coming in at that red arrow in Barrow, Alaska. That's where the sun would be positioned in their sky. But you see the Tropic of Cancer, how far down it is? How are you ever going to get that angle? They've only got a 23 point something degree tilt and we've maxed that out by placing the sun at the Tropic of Cancer. No way it'd work. So distance will straighten out steep angles. You can't have them. And don't forget the inverse square law of light. Now we're going to take a couple of their diagrams. We're going to look at the angles and where they connect on the moon, and we're going to see where that terminator line would be. And okay, you can see the terminator line. I've darkened it in here. So when we explode that, look where the terminator line is, with light coming in at those angles. We don't see that. That's not reality. Not at all. But yet they use this and they disregard all this other stuff, like the terminator line. Now remember, this light is constant, and you would never be able to get a half moon. The best you would ever get is what you're seeing right there, because that light never stops. And the same thing when we look at the Earth here next. Let's look at another drawing. And this one's on the Earth. So there's the angle in the red lines. There's the angle we're looking at. When we explode that, now we don't have a halfway terminator line on the Earth. So we're going to change the length of our days and our nights by quite a little bit. And this change would be permanent because light doesn't stop. It's always shining at the Earth, and you would never, ever have a halfway terminator line halfway. It would always be off. So let's do some drawing here. I've got 4 red dots on that sun, and those are going to represent their umbra, penumbra shadows that they have in those diagrams. We're going to see what it does to shadows on the Earth. Using the method of drawing shadows that we had in the beginning of this video, I've pre-drawn all of these lines out to give you just a rough idea of where the shadows would be if we had 4 points of light coming in from a large light source. Remember, we don't have a large light source. Nobody sees that. So this is what would end up happening from their diagram. The large sun with all the converging and diverging sun rays. This is what you're going to see on the ground from Aristarchus' stick in the ground. He didn't calculate any of this stuff out. So I didn't bore you with drawing each line individually, but this is kind of the shadows you get just from those 4 points of light on that one little Aristophanes stick. You would get multiple shadows. And now let's look at it with even more, because they have a lot more than that on their big sun. So let's see what we would get if we used all of these points of light sources. We would draw out 1, 2. We draw each one out. I'm not going to do the center ones, kind of know what it's going to do. We'd end up with something similar to this from one stick in the ground from all those light sources, and it could even be worse. But it would be a mess, and we don't see that in reality. And those, my friends, are just a few of the problems that I have with these 2 drawings that you see on the screen. And they aren't very well thought out. And those people that believe it don't think very hard either. But they don't explain, and they didn't the first day I saw it. They didn't explain to me in a sufficient manner that made sense scientifically and the way light and shadow work, why we have a 70-mile wide shadow from a supposedly 2,159 mile wide object in the sky high above the Earth. Why we only have a 70-mile wide shadow. And it causes a lot of problems when they draw it this way, as you can see, and there's probably a lot more. Thanks for watching.